most I got the power to let them fall. Like raindrops, been telling them to do right, but the wrong, they won't stop. The most I blessing keeps on showering. Oh, yeah. Remember giving them.
Tell me about your parents and your upbringing.
My father said, never judge a man until you've walked in his shoes. My father said, a fair thing is a pretty thing, and a right wrongs no man. I was raised with a Catholic mother, Irish Catholic mother, and an Irish Protestant father, so we had war in our house all day, every day. Was retiring for her job, resigning because she was adopting a child, so I went in and applied for the job, and I got her job because the superintendent thought if he was losing one Jennison, he'd gain another one. Well, what he found out very shortly was I wasn't my sister.
Did you do any sort of racial justice kind of stuff, fighting white supremacy, before the Martin Luther King incident?
Martin Luther King was one of our heroes of the month in February, every year, along with, unfortunately, George Washington, who owned slaves, bought and sold people for money, Abraham Lincoln, who refused to free the slaves, Davy Crockett, who died while he was killing off Mexicans while we tried to take over part of their land. That was racist teaching. I would not have accused myself of teaching racism, but I did. That was the curriculum that you taught. I taught the curriculum. So what I was doing was not educating, I was indoctrinating. That's what we do in the schools in this country. We call it education, but we indoctrinate students. We teach them how to be good Americans. We teach them a lie in order to guarantee that they're going to be good Americans. And they believe the lie.
What's the lie?
The lie is the superiority of white people. It's a lie. It's a flat-out lie. I thought we had stopped until I talked to my 7th grade granddaughter in Washington State a year ago. They were learning about the Williams Massacre, in which, as she explained it to me, a group of Indians killed a white missionary. I said, is your teacher going to tell you about the Mountain Meadow Massacre? She said, what's the Mountain Meadow Massacre? I said, it's when the Mormons sent a group of Mormons out to kill all the members of a wagon train that were coming through Utah. They killed every member of that except one young girl, I think, survived. The soldiers went out, this cavalry went out and found this wagon train with all these dead people, knew that the Indians hadn't done it, talked to the Mormons, and they said, yes, we did it. I said, ask your teacher if he's going to tell you about the Mountain Meadow Massacre. She called me the next week and said, Grammy, you got me in a lot of trouble. I said, what happened? She said, I raised my hand and asked if we're going to learn about the Mountain Meadow Massacre, and the teacher took me out in the hall and said, Grace, we don't talk about that in this school. I can't teach you that, because if I did, you wouldn't be a good American. You wouldn't love America anymore. I went ballistic. This is not teaching. This is not education. The word education, to educate someone means to be in the act of leading them out of ignorance. You don't do that by indoctrinating them. That child was being indoctrinated. That made it tough for that teacher after that, because what he said no longer had fact behind it. She didn't believe him as much anymore, and she shouldn't have.
You know, I had this question much.
But racism based on a lie, that's idiocy. But racism based on a lie, that's idiocy.
Nature. Power never willingly concedes anything to the powerless.
Unless you're in the situation that the United States is in right now, and the situation that people like Ben Wattenberg are scared to death about. You need to realize that within 30 years, white people will have lost their numerical majority in the United States of America. And white men say to me, every time I do or give a speech, every time I do it, somebody comes up and says, well, if people of color, as we have been trained to teach those who are other than white, if they get power, aren't they going to want to do to us what we have done to them?
And do you think that that is the root fear?
Right now it is.
That pervades the land, and especially in a very high-profile way, the political landscape.
Dinosaurus T. Rump is trading on that fear.
What's his name again?
I call him Dinosaurus T. Rump because he is like a rump, no doubt about it. I'm furious about what he's doing, and he is trading on that very fear. When he says we're going to keep those people from south of the border out of this country, he is trading on that fear of the loss of white power.
I want to come back there.
White
I want to
numbers.
I want to come back to that.
In this country, I was going to pick out a group of people on the basis of a physical characteristic over which they had absolutely no control. I was going to say ugly things about them because of that physical characteristic. I was going to treat them as though all the ugly things I was saying about them were absolutely true. I was going to lower my expectations of them. I was going to force them to live down to my expectations of them, and when they did, I was going to say, see, you're like that because of that physical characteristic. Now, I've been doing that. At that time, I had been doing that for over 33 years as a citizen in the United States of America. I know exactly how to do it. I'm a white woman. I know from birth, prenatally, we know how to treat those that we want to put down, and we do it all the time. We give lessons in that in school. I decided that the next morning I didn't know what physical characteristic to use. I couldn't use height. I was the only tall one in the room. Couldn't use age for obvious reasons. Refused to use weight because we do that all the time. Couldn't use hair color. It's too easy to change. Didn't want to use gender. Sexism is rampant. I decided I would do what Hitler did. I would treat my students positively or negatively on the basis of the color of their eyes. I didn't know how this exercise would work because I'm an ignorant white female. I don't know about racism. So before I went to bed that night, I said the only prayer I ever say anymore, oh Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. I said it over and over like a mantra. Within 15 minutes after I started that exercise the next morning, I learned something really valuable. You better be careful about what you pray for. You might get it, and you might find out that was precisely what you did not want.
What does that mean?
I didn't want to know how I looked to people of color. The minute I separated my group according to the color of their eyes, and that year I put the brown-eyed people on the top, I think. Yeah, brown-eyed people were on the top the first year. Immediately, I told the kids, blue-eyed people aren't as smart as brown-eyed people. They aren't as civilized. You can't teach them anything. They aren't as clean. Immediately, little brown-eyed Debbie sitting in the front row looked up at me and said, how come you're the teacher here if you got them blue eyes? And I thought, well, you little... Wasn't a nice thing, I was thinking. And then a little boy spoke up and said, if she didn't have them blue eyes, she'd be the principal or the superintendent. They're both brown-eyed. They immediately took it that they must be brown-eyed because they had power. They were powerful males, so they must be brown-eyed. Immediately, those kids began to treat me the way they had learned to treat people who were inferior to themselves. They treated me as I found out how it feels to be tolerated. Before that exercise, every day before that exercise, they admired me. Some of them feared me because I don't mess around. But that day, I found out how it feels to be tolerated. In this country, we use tolerate to mean put up with. They put up with me. They just barely tolerated me until in the afternoon when I pulled down the map, the wall map, and the ring slipped off my thumb. The map went around and around and around the ruler, and I said, well, I've done it again. Little brown-eyed Debbie sitting in the front row once again said, what do you expect? You've got blue eyes, haven't you? And as God is my judge, I have never felt like this about a child before and only once since. I could see myself in my mind's eye, and I can still see it. I could see myself backhanding that little brown-eyed witch against the wall. I wanted her to hit that wall and slide down like a broken egg, and I wanted to be at the bottom when she got there. I learned about anger. I learned about violence. I learned about my own thin veneer of civilization. I learned about self-control. I learned about what a rotten teacher I must be to think that way about a child. And I thought, oh my Lord. I knew there were teachers who felt that way about some of the fractious boys in school all day, every day. I knew from being in Waterloo that there were teachers who felt that way about black males, particularly black males, all day, every day.
It's a wholly transforming experience.
It was like, your life will never be the same, fool. You did this to yourself. Now your life will never be the same, and it never will.
And in the immediate act,
white people have the right to be ignorant and to insist that they be allowed to remain ignorant, which is the reason I wear this shirt.
Prejudice is an emotional commitment to ignorance.
Absolutely, and we want to maintain our prejudices. And if you think we don't, then you look at what has happened with President Barack Obama. He would have been an extremely successful president, but we white folks have the right to keep him in his place, and that is what we have managed to do with that fine, brilliant young man. Now, I may not agree with everything he has done, but it isn't because of the color of his skin that I disagree with him. But it was and is, and many of the members of the House of Representatives and the Senate said that that's exactly what they were going to do, was stop that black man from being successful as President of the United States. Now, that's not white privilege, that's white ignorance. That's willing to let this country go down the tubes in order to support their own ignorance where skin color is concerned. What was your question? Yeah, because things are getting worse now instead of better. We are going backward drastically in this country on a daily basis, and people don't seem to realize it. Or if they do realize it, don't seem to care or want to. As Ronald Reagan said, he wanted to take us back to the good old days, the 50s. Those were good for white men. They weren't worth a damn for people, so-called people of color, or white women, but they were good for white men. That's where he wanted to take us. And he did, in many ways. And now we have somebody running for the presidency who is determined that he'll take us back to that. And in worse ways, you cannot criticize every group that is other than white Anglo-Saxon male and expect a whole lot of people to go along with what you say. But evidently you can expect them to, because they are.
Yeah.
Prenatally, we know how to treat those that we want to put down, and we do it all the time. The lie is the superiority of white people.